Welcome to another edition of the ORF Studio and the sidelines of the Raisina Dialogue 2018, and we have with us right now Rick Rossow from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Washington, D.C., where he holds the Wadhwani Chair in U.S.-India Policy Studies. So Rick, let's start the conversation with where do you see the change and where do you see the continuity from Obama to Trump administration?
There's a bit of jealousy inside my office at CSIS. Generally, you see a lot of discontinuity, whether it's withdrawing from trade agreements, reopening other ones, partnerships that we thought were strong that suddenly are on a weaker wicket. But then India, for some reason, has been largely protected. So the areas we had in cooperation before the election of President Trump have mostly been maintained. And that even includes areas such as clean energy cooperation. I mean, an area where Trump has firmly severed what had been the nodal agenda for the Obama administration on the global stage, but bilaterally he's actually maintained most of the areas. But probably you'd still say that similar to Obama administration as well, we've got great cooperation and collaboration on the defense and security front, but economically our governments still have a really tough time finding common ground, whether it's bilaterally or on the multilateral stage with our recent WTO round in Buenos Aires.
So, sitting here in Delhi, if you're looking at Trump administration, it looks very favorable to India. As you said, on strategic issues, on security issues, and there are problems, on economic front, and people have talked about transactionalism, etc., etc. It has not yet happened to the extent that I think many were expecting. Perhaps it's coming, we don't know. But I think on the security front, if you look at the South Asia policy, if you look at the National Security Strategy document, there are some very positive things. So I think many in India would conclude that, look, the Trump administration is starting from where Obama administration ended. So almost there is a leap in terms of how US is looking at South Asia.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of people that have joined this administration as political appointees from institutions like mine, they joined because they're sort of hoping that some of these foreign policy issues that have been slow moving for their evolution, like withdrawing support for Pakistan, like confronting the threat that we see from China, moving very slowly, the pace was very plodding, and they're hoping that a president that is not bound by precedents would make quicker moves. And certainly on Pakistan, you've seen that. Of course, we'll wait and see if indeed all aid is cut off or what extent, and if he'll walk back those remarks, as he's done in some other aggressive statements. On China as well, where the call with President Tsai in the early days really woke Beijing up. But then, Taiwan is almost used as a bargaining chip on the trade imbalance later on. But, folks do go in because they're hoping that with an administration like this that does not care about continuity, you're going to see faster snaps than you would have seen otherwise.
So on the economic front, what is the biggest issue from your perspective? Is it the trade-related issues, or is it largely the immigration, which for India is something at the top of the agenda?
Well, it's both. I think you've got a growing list of issues that India has concerns about in the United States. They want to see reduced fees on visas, make sure that there aren't limitations put on visas, the long-awaited totalization agreement on Social Security payments. So there is a growing list of issues that India has with the United States. American business issues in India, it's a wide range. They want to see changes on patent protection, which I know the Indian government isn't going to move on, tax-related issues, and then there are issues related to local manufacturing content, and the Modi government has actually expanded those. But that's mostly a reaction to China. So, for somebody like me who looks at the negativity from that, because the United States has been sort of collateral damage on some of these trade closures, and actually, what Trump is concerned about on trade and what India is concerned about, there's a real overlap. So whether the leaders can actually come together, acknowledge our shared concern about the trade imbalances with China, and carve out a lane for each other. And that's what I'm sort of hoping we can broach the gap on the trade side.
So sitting in Washington, how do you look at the Modi administration? This will be now, they'll be coming close to the four years. There were perhaps some expectations that were not fulfilled, but I think an argument can be made that they have sort of rammed up certain sectors of this engagement. I mean, only Modi could go and say hesitations of history are done. We have overcome. How do you see that from Washington? Do you see this as a positive? Do you see that he has laid the foundation for something big to happen?
Well, I think he's the strongest partner that we've had, both on the economic and the security front, of any Indian leader since independence. But on the economic front, I would say that I think the first year in office, you saw fast out of the gates a number of reforms on oil and gas and FDI caps and things. and then a bit of a slowdown. A big one, of course, GST happening more recently. Despite teething pains, I fully expect that a year, 5 years from now, it's going to be one of the major reforms that India will look back on. But you've seen a slowdown overall, apart from GST, in big picture reforms, and it makes sense heading to an election. I mean, apart from the big reforms that we all sort of follow and hope will happen, there's this whole other set of programs that the Modi government's been doing. Expanding bank accounts, electrifying every village, which will happen very shortly, cooking gas cylinders. These kind of programs, I think, heading into an election, A, they're great for human development. B, people that see these things in their home, when it comes election time, and if they think that's something that the Modi government gave me, they're more likely to vote. So the econ side, you've seen a transition from big reforms to delivery of service, which is a better electoral issue. But defense and security, that's maintained a good upward trajectory, irrespective of state elections or the impending national election. That one, though, without, I think, as strong of a champion as we had in the United States with our former Defense Secretary Ash Carter, who woke up every day and thought about India as one of the 3 or 4 things he wanted to work on, and every time he would meet with his counterpart, a big agreement would be done. So for the defense side, hopefully we can maintain that drumbeat too. We haven't seen it so far, where you risk, if you don't have senior level political meetings as often, that you won't see those tangible pillars of progress. So I'm hoping that area we can also begin to pick up and maintain.
And one aspect that you, I know, cover very seriously in CSIS and as part of your program is the state level reforms. Are you optimistic that states are competing more, that they're trying to do better, they're getting better at economic governance, and this will have a major impact on how US and India engage with each other?
Yeah, it is. To take kind of a step back and answer the question a little bit differently, I find a lot of international commentators, when they see Modi dominating his party, winning elections, they think of him as a strong man arising in the model of Erdogan or Hugo Chavez. I don't see that at all, and if you look at the tangible levers of power, the real ways that the country is run, he's actually devolved more of that to the states. States can now take ODA lending directly. The transformation from the Planning Commission to Niti Aayog, it is night and day the way that the place functions. It's more collaborative. The chief minister set the agenda. So you've seen an actual transition of technical powers more to the states than things that have been soaked up. GST is probably one of the few where the center began to pick up some power from the states. And states are actually, for the first time, being ranked depending on the business environments there. Previous governments wouldn't have the stomach to do that because, especially in a coalition environment, if you rank the DMK low and they've got 19 seats in parliament, you risk a confidence motion. Modi doesn't have quite that same kind of concerns. But importantly, you haven't seen states argue against it so much. And instead, they're setting that agenda for themselves, something they want to maintain and upkeep and actually improve the rankings for. So I think he's done a pretty good job. Easier to do when you have a single party majority. So in 2019, if he loses 10 seats, and that's all it takes to be in a coalition, it might be a little tougher to maintain, but so far so good.
Yes, I think the trajectory has been very interesting because even Mamata Banerjee in West Bengal is now having an investment summit. She's some of the same big corporate houses that she's luring.
It's great that you mentioned that because I have seen that. I mean, this is how governance works. Mamata Banerjee, a rebel for so many years, really hadn't been making a lot of progress in chipping away at the communists. And then suddenly you have the issues of development, and she became, in some ways, more socialist than the communist government, flung herself into power, and was still acting very much a rebel those first couple of years. But then she wins re-election. She wins re-election, winning more seats than the Communist Party ever did in the state. And then parliament election happens. She wins more seats in that than the Communist Party ever did. She feels confident. And suddenly you've got to govern. And she's doing reforms. She's having these investor summits. I think people are still looking at it with a wary eye. But from what I see on following state developments on a day-to-day basis, West Bengal is one of those that I keep an eye on very closely. In my conversations with Niti Aayog too, they say they're asking good questions. They want to find out best practices. So it is good when one of those states that we'd always seen as one of the laggards, like Bihar 10 years before, suddenly starts to pick itself up.
Absolutely. I think that's a positive story as far as the center-state dynamic is concerned. I think lastly, to round this off, what is the big idea in US-India relations? I mean, we saw a civil nuclear deal as the epitome of the engagement. Then there was some disappointment in Washington that nothing much is happening on the ground, that the corporate sector did not feel they benefited much. And there is a political backlash also. So is there appetite, for example, for another big idea, or do we then have to manage what we have already in the pipeline?
I don't think there's another deal on the horizon to the scale of the nuclear agreement, right? And part of the conversation here at Raisina has been about emerging structures and will India and other emerging countries be let in. The nuclear agreement was that, right? There was an embargo against certain countries from being in the club, and India was introduced in the club. So, you look at other things of that scale, and it would be UN Security Council. Well, there's no appetite for those kind of reforms. Changes in voting structure at the World Bank maybe, but that won't be seen as much of a bilateral issue unless the United States is the hammer to make that happen. So I don't think there's anything at that scale, but there are substantive agreements that fall underneath that. Two that we're not supposed to talk about in public and let the folks do it are the two remaining facilitation agreements, as they call it now, that will help to strengthen defense trade. Coming to conclusion and actually having production of equipment under the Defense Technology and Trade Initiative. I think if we come up with something useful products under this aircraft carrier working group that would actually be inducted either for aircraft carrier 2 or at least 3 and 4 in India too, is a tangible sign of progress. On the economic side, our new ambassador, Ken Juster, had also referenced the other day, we should begin thinking about on the economic side, maybe considering what's the roadmap to getting to a free trade agreement. There's not a lot of appetite because, again, they've seen the Modi government actually more anti-trade even than the Singh government was on actual trade. But at the same time, the econ remains the weakest leg of the table. And we've got to do something because just fighting about these little issues, we're not getting anywhere. And as we saw in 2013, when these issues began to culminate and one diplomat was arrested up in New York, the relationship collapsed. So it can be very dangerous if that bleeds over. So we need big ideas in the econ side.
On that note, Rick, thank you so much for being with us here
Of course,
today.
Harsh.
And always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, cheers.
Take care.